afternoon, everybody. Thanks for being with me again. Today is going to be a very fun webinar, I hope. I think we're going to learn some new cool things you can do with gradients and gradient maps. So I'm going to start first, before I get into working in Photoshop. I did a quick little 3-slide little presentation here just to talk briefly about the differences between the tools and kind of give you a preview of what's coming. So there's 3 ways you can apply gradients. First, we have the gradient tool, which is on the left toolbar in Photoshop. And these are also can all be done in Elements tools, maybe in different locations though. So you would find the tool on that toolbar, and then you would manually add a new blank layer to add that gradient to. And this would allow us to add a gradient to the image. However, once we put it in there, we can't go back and change the colors of the gradient once it's applied. You would have to delete that layer and then reapply a different one. So a gradient applies color to your image, kind of like a paintbrush over the top of the image. It's kind of opaque, and then we change it by using blending modes and opacities, just like we do with textures. So the gradient adjustment layer, just like all of our other adjustment layers, you know, whether it's hue and saturation or contrast or any of those kind of things, you're going to access it through the adjustment layers panel, which is that little black and white circle, typically at the bottom of your layers panel in most versions, and you would choose gradient. This adjustment layer gives you the ability to change the gradient and to move the gradient around on the layer, which you can't do using the gradient tool. It also automatically applies a layer mask to the layer for you, just like all of the other adjustment layers do. And then we have a gradient map adjustment layer, which utilizes your foreground and background colors to create the gradient, although you can use presets and custom gradients just like we do with the other tool, but it will default to that foreground and background. A gradient map actually maps the color values in an image from that 0 to 255 scale to the tone or color values that we want to set it to. So, for example, if we create a black and white image or add toning to an image, we can give it the look of a sunset, or you can utilize this in lots of ways. And you're going to see me do all of this, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of a, I don't know, how-to kind of on the differences of the different tools. So let's go back to Photoshop and I can get rid of this. So I already have my first image open. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and apply a gradient. And with this one, I'm going to show you how you can use a gradient to warm up an image. So this is my, all of these images have been edited. We're not doing editing today. We're just going to work with the gradients. So as I was mentioning before, if I added a blank layer and use the gradient tool, which is over here on your toolbar on the left, if I applied a gradient, I'm just going to pick the default one there and say OK. And then you would have to, once you select a color, you would draw where you want the gradient to go. So whether it's a straight linear, or you could do a diagonal, etc. And then you would blend it. But you can't like double click in here to change the color. So rather than using that layer, we're going to go to that black and white circle, our adjustment layer panel, and choose gradient. And that's going to automatically open up this gradient fill box. And it usually defaults to one of the basic gradients when you first open it. And you can see that there are different styles here. We can do linear, which means it's just going to be a gradated color going down the image. You can also do a radial, which is great if you want to do something with a sunset or create light bursts. And then there's angles and reflected. I really don't use those as much because we can also angle it with this little slider, which I'm going to show you as we go along. So to get to the selections of gradients, you're just going to click in this gradient bar and that's going to open up your gradient editor. And I have the ones for today saved in a file. These are the new ones that I just created that are on the website, and I actually got carried away and I just created 5 more sets that I'll be posting tomorrow in the store. I just finished those earlier. So I'm going to go to this group because I know this is where the ones are that I want to use, and I'm going to use this yellow one that I created, and I'm also going to show you how you can create one or modify one. So we'll say okay, and you can see now I don't want it as a radial, I want to go back to linear. It defaults usually to, if you look at the gradient, the darker side here tends to go to the bottom. So the left becomes the bottom. So to switch this around, because I want the darker at the top, you can either change the angle to -90, or I usually just click this reverse box and that's just going to flip it around. So you can do that anytime you apply a gradient, and then you would say okay. And then from here we would change our blending mode. I'm going to use soft light. And then I'm going to bring back that opacity to about there. So you can see the before, it's kind of got some cool tones going on in the background. And with this, now it looks like it was shot during golden hour. So if we wanted to say we don't like that gradient, we want to try something different. Because it is a gradient adjustment layer, you can double click that thumbnail and then go back to here. And you can either choose another gradient, or let's say we wanted to create a new one. So this one defaulted with 2 color stops. You're going to see some of the ones I use have a lot more, 5 or 6. But to do a basic one, you would just, in this little color box, double click it, and that will bring up your color picker. So we could choose, say we wanted something a little more greenish. And then on the lighter side, again, double click, and we could choose, you can choose a color out of your image just like we do with other things, and then choose a lighter version. And because we've already applied this, you can see it actually changing on the image. Say okay. Now if you want to save a gradient that you've created, you'll see that it defaults to custom. Once we change it, it changed the name from what it was to custom. So you're going to type in a new name. I'll just say green test. But don't just close this box. In order to get this to save up here in your panel, you've got to click new. And then it's going to add it to the bottom of this panel. And you could always drag it into a folder. So now if I want to go back and use that again, it's saved. So then we can close that, and now you can see it's changed to that green. So you might want to adjust your opacity to less or more. You could always play with the blending modes if you wanted to darken something. Overlay. Soft light usually works really well with gradients. And that's the basics of how to put in a gradient. So next, let's close this guy. Let's see, do we have any questions before I go on? And you'll notice that I was able to set up, Zoom gave me a few more options now. I was able to do away with the Q&A box, so we just have the chat box. And if at the bottom of the chat box, if you're going to type something where it says to, select everyone, and that way everybody can see the comments or questions. I would appreciate that. Okay, so let's close this guy. And next, excuse me, I'm going to show you how we can use a gradient to add a little more color to our sky. And this is a great way to use some basic gradients. So again, I'm going to go down here and select gradient. And for this one, I'm going to go back to my folder for the webinar. I'm going to select this second one. Say OK. And again, I'm going to click my reverse because I want the blue on top. And we're going to say OK. We're going to change this to soft light. I'm going to lower my opacity. to about 48%. Now, don't worry about it on the building. We're going to take care of that in a second. But before we do that, you will notice that this gradient went from the green to white, right? So you can even see that in the thumbnail. It went from the darker, kind of tealish blue-green to white. Now, because there is white down here at the bottom, it actually brightened our grass. So if I turn it off, you can see that was our original image. By having the white there, it's kind of blowing out my grass a little bit. So the way we can change that, we can reopen this gradient. And where these white squares are, we're going to change those to neutral gray. So I'm going to double click on here. And the way you set 50% or neutral gray, the color number is 808080. And you'll see that your little color picker is right here in the middle. We'll say OK. And what this gray does is it means it's not going to change anything basically there. 8080, whoops, 080. And then we're going to do this last one and go 80. So now, say OK, OK, OK. You'll see that my grass, when I turn this on and off, is not changing. The only place the color is changing is up here in my sky. Now, the other thing that, if you look at the gradient, we want the blue to come down probably to about 80% of this image. So we can also take a look at it and make sure that our blues are coming down a little bit farther. So I can move that down. And when I move these, you can see this location. That's telling me the percentage between each stop. So this is like, yeah, we can leave it about 83 or so. So you can see it's fading this blue down a little bit farther. And then we'll say OK and OK. Again, you can test it by turning on and off, and you can see it's adding just a little bit of blue down here, which is perfect. Now again, it automatically added that layer mask for us. So now I want to get rid of the blue on the building because I only wanted to change the color of my sky. The easiest way to do this is we're going to click back on our image layer. And I'm going to click on the quick selection tool up here in the upper left. And then I'm going to click at the top, select subject. And we're going to give it a second. And you can see it's selected the barn pretty well. So we're going to add to that selection, which you can see there's a plus sign in the middle of the circle of the tool. So it's going to automatically add to that selection. I don't have to hold anything down. And I'm just going to run this brush along the grass here. And we'll get rid of that part too and make sure this is all clear. And now I'm going to click on my layer mask. And just like I know you've seen me do filling a layer with color. On a PC, we use Alt Backspace, and on a Mac, it's Option Delete. We're going to do the same thing in here. I'm going to do my Alt Backspace, and it's only going to put, I got to make sure your foreground color is black because that's what we want to mask with. It's going to only put the black where the selection has been made. So if I do Alt Backspace, you can see it's perfectly masked that shape right there without having to manually try and follow all these edges. Control D will deselect it. And you can see now we've added some color to our sky and not affected our building or the foreground. So there we go. So let's see if we have any questions. Somebody said, why gray and not transparent? The gray, you could do transparent as well. I just find it easier since it has a color in there, it was easier to just change it to neutral gray than to delete that color. Yes, we are recording this, so if somebody's listening to it while they're driving in the car. Hopefully you're watching the road, Lorraine. Yes, all my webinars are recorded and it'll be up on the YouTube channel by morning, and you'll get an email from the Zoom system, usually in the afternoon. It's like usually 24 hours after the event. And I'll put it in the blog on Thursday as well. So here we go. Alrighty. So that is that. So I'll close. And our next image, we're going to use a gradient, and we're going to angle this one a bit. I'm going to show you how to use a multicolored one. So this one I did leave the layer so you can kind of see how I edited this. My original image was this. This is Mount Moriah Cemetery in Philadelphia. There's been a volunteer group that has been trying to clean it up and renovate this over the years. It's a long story to the way it became the way it is, but they're doing a great job. And this was probably about 4 or 5 years ago, maybe more, that I was there. So I took this into Luminar and did my basic editing, and then I did change out my sky, and this was one of the Luminar ones that had the lightning bolt in it already. So from here, we're going to go ahead and add that gradient layer. Click on here, go to our box. This time we're going to use this kind of teal purple blue, and I want the purple at the top, so we're going to say okay. We're going to reverse it, and I also want to make, I want the purple kind of to be at the top right and then kind of fade diagonally. So I'm going to change this angle to 62, and I wrote that down from having done this before. Normally you could just grab this little line and move it around, and when you let go you'll see it change. So, no, this cannot be done in Lightroom. This is, you need the layers to do this, so this is a Photoshop technique. There are other things you can do in Lightroom, but you can't do it. It wouldn't be the same way as working with these here. Okay, so we're going to say okay. And this one I'm going to change my blending mode to multiply and reduce the opacity to 72 or 3, around there. 73 is good. And then I also added a brightness contrast adjustment layer to brighten this up a little bit more. And I brought up the brightness to 20 and the contrast to 26. So you can always add adjustment layers as well afterwards if you wanted to do that. So you can see I've got like the more purple up here, and the color is diagonal down here. I just thought it gave it a very spooky, Halloween-y kind of look. So you know, definitely play around with this stuff because there's just so much you can do. So the next one, I'm going to show you the difference between the gradient and the gradient map. I'm going to do the same image both ways and let you see the difference. So I'm going to open up my image. If you don't like spiders, sorry. I thought this one was really cool. This was outside our deck last year. I was looking out at, you know, waiting for sunrise, and it was kind of foggy in the background, and this guy had made this ginormous web. It was probably about 3 feet top to bottom, and I just thought it was really pretty, and it still had some of the dew, you know, hanging on it. It was like the best spider web I've ever gotten. Probably not perfect, but good for me. So I wanted to warm up this color even more. This is the color that it came out, but I'm going to go ahead and add, first we'll do it with the gradient. Go up here, I'm going to use this brown, and I do want this one darker at the bottom, so we're going to leave it that way. And then I'm going to change this to soft light, and I'm going to leave it at 100%. So that is the gradient version. Okay, so I'm going to turn this off for a second, go back here, and this time I'm going to choose the gradient map. And of course it defaulted to just, you know, picks black and white quite often, which is actually a very cool look. But we're going to use that same, yeah, Dave says Halloween, the same gradient with the same settings. and not multiply, soft light. And the difference is going to be, I'm going to open my finished one too that I have saved so I can put them side by side so you could really see the difference. All right, so we move this one. I'm going to make sure I have one with one version. Whoops, I don't need the selection tool on. So this one is, let's make this the gradient fill. And this one is the gradient map. So you can see if you look closely, let me try and zoom them in a little bit. The gradient map applies, it kind of blends the color a little better. And I'm going to do another one where you can see this happen with a duotone. But I just wanted to show you the difference between these two. It's subtle, but there is a difference. So depending on the effect you're going for, this one is the gradient fill. So it's more like on top of the webs. And then this one is kind of blended a little bit more. It's a little more subtle with the gradient map. Somebody asked, can I also create metallic gradients? You can. I haven't created metallic ones, but I can show you a set that I have in here. They don't really look like metal, but the way you do them is by the variations of the different color stops. So I'll show you that in a sec. So let's close that one. Yes, I agree, Pat. The gradient map allows the web itself to glow a little bit more. It really makes it stand out, more of the detail, I think, in the actual image, especially something like this that's very fine. I think that works really well. What's that, dear? Posse mom. Yes, if that was the posse mom. Pat has some labs, and she calls them the posse, P-A-W-S-E-E. And they're very cute. Alrighty, so let's delete this layer for a second. I'll show you what the metallics look like that I have. So we go down here under, oh, they're there. So these are, this has got one, this one's got a whole bunch. So you can see with these, it's a matter of going from like light to darks and brights to dark and variations on that. So this is how you, what are considered metallic gradients, if you want that like goldish color. And you would create those the same way as if you were modifying. You can add a color stop. If you just click right below a box, it will add a stop and you can change the color to whatever. You would add another color stop. So you could do that as many stops as you need to create the gradient that you're looking for. And some she has kind of stripes. I got this one, Pretty Webs, I think was the website that it came from. It was a freebie a while ago. And then I have some others that I found somewhere. These are more of the like silvery, coppery kind of colors. And I do use these sometimes. I do like these when you're looking for something very subtle. So definitely it's something to have fun with because you can do a lot with it. All right, next image, we're going to do one of our favorite shots. It's one of the places that we sometimes take people to shoot. There's a lot going on. They have a couple times a year, they have the, oh gosh, what do they call the gas show? Oh, Dixie Gas. And it's like gasoline and car memorabilia type show. Petroleum, yeah, it's like, you know, signs from gas stations and different things and all kinds of accessories and whatnot. It's pretty fun. That's actually, I think, what was going on when we were here this day. And I added this antiques and things over here because it was just kind of a blank sign. And so I took that from a place out in just outside of Sedona that we were at, a store. And I've done a couple of processing things with this image. that have come out good, but I wanted to try doing a duotone. And this is something you may see a lot like in advertising and stuff. And the way that it works best is to first create a black and white of this image. Now you could use the gradient map to also do a black and white. Obviously not like that. You would need to reverse it. So let's reverse that out. So you could just do a black and white like that if you're in a, want to do it very quickly, but you can't adjust like the contrast. Like I think the sky should be darker and this should be brighter. So what I prefer to do is do a regular black and white adjustment layer. And then I can adjust, my color. I can make my car a little brighter, add some more drama to the sky in the blues. So this gives you, I think, a lot more flexibility as far as a black and white. So you can play around with that. And then from there, we're going to add the gradient map. And this is where we'll select our duotone. And what a duotone is it's just that it's two colors. You've got a color here and a color here, and they just blend in the middle. There aren't any other color stops. It's just two different colors. This was one I created just playing around, and I kind of like the way that it looked. There are all of these. You can always find things on the web, of course. Of course, like I said, I just made a bunch of sets, and I'm going to have some more on the site by tomorrow that will also be on sale. So there's tons of things, and I always share freebies, as you know, in the Tuesday blog. There was a bunch of stuff in today's blog if you haven't checked it out yet. So a duotone is just that. It's going to create the darker color is going to blend with the darker tones of the image, and then your lighter color is going to blend with your white and lighter tones of the image. And that's pretty much it. It's that simple. Just make a black and white first. And then you can see it gave it so much more drama by having the sky, have the adjustments that I made. If we did it the other way, let's do it real quick. If we just did the black and white here, and we turned on the duotone, you can see it's much flatter. It just doesn't have that same impact as that one. Just to me, it added a lot more drama to the sky, and then you can really control all of the different things in the image. Alrighty, do we have any questions? Darcy said, yep, you could make it look like a cyanotype with all the chemicals. That's absolutely, you could do that. You could do a blue and white duotone and get that cyanotype look, and it's a lot quicker and easier than trying to do that with all that mess. Can you lighten the sections once the duotone is done? You can't change. You could go back into if you're using the black and white layer, yes. So I could come back in here and I could continue to adjust it as needed. So you could do that. You would adjust the black and white layer rather than the duotone layer. And I just did that at normal blending mode in 100%. If you wanted to darken it, you could try, like multiply would probably be too dark, but you could try other blending modes. I think for this particular effect, normal's probably going to work the best. Darken's not bad though. It adds a little more darkness if you wanted to do that. Multiply is way too dark. Color burn's too dark. Soft light, and you could always lower the opacity if you like that look, and don't want it to be just quite so heavy. You want it to be maybe more like a subtle black and white. Oops, I'm doing the wrong layer. This layer. Lower, so it just is a little bit of a color on a black and white. It's a great way to do a sepia look or something like that too, by using the gradient map. Alrighty. And then one of my favorite things to do with gradient maps is to change textures into other textures. So we're going to do a couple versions on here. So let me grab my notes. So we're going to do a gradient map. A gradient map layer. And I'm not going to do a black and white first, though. I'm just going to apply the color. And I'm going to use this, one of those gold ones, actually. And you can see this one's got a couple of color stops. And that would be that version. So you can see where I've just changed all the colors into shades of gold. So that's one way to do that. Phil asks, where do I find the blog? It is meredithimages.wordpress.com. There you go. And then version 2, we're going to turn this one off for a second. And we're going to click on our background layer. And then we're going to add the gradient map. And for this one, I'm just going to use the black and white. We are going to reverse it though. And then, good question. Dave asked, how would you know when to reverse it? Well, because I didn't like the way it looked, the way that it was. It just, to me, it looked too dark. And like when we did it on the car, it looked like a negative rather than a positive. So it's a matter of taste. A lot of times, like I said, the reverse is just changing, the black to the top and the white to the bottom. But it also is going to change the way the colors interact. And then if I turn this back on, you can see with this black and white layer, you can see where it's brightened some of the areas because of the white. So that's the difference of using a black and white layer as well as the gradient map. Okay, so that's 2 ways to do it. So we're going to turn off the black and white layer. And let's turn that off. Well, we can leave that on, I guess. We're going to add a black and white adjustment layer so you can see the difference. And in here, I'm going to change my settings. I want 40, I want 100, I want minus 38, 88, minus 45, whoops, and 79. Alrighty, so that's that layer. So now you can see how much brighter that looks compared to that black and white layer. If we turn that on, that was with just the black and white gradient map, and this is with the black and white adjustment layer. So you can really, again, have much more control over how your layers merge together. And then you can reopen that black and white adjustment layer and go back, and you can see if I wanted to bring that green up, it lets me bring in a lot more detail in there. And because my original colors are the blues and the greens, that's why it's adjusting those. And the blues, you can see just by moving that, how much difference it makes. So you can come up with something completely different just by doing that. And then again, you can also add a brightness adjustment layer and tone it down, add some more contrast. I find a lot of times when I use the gradient maps, especially on textures, I tend to bump up the contrast, and it seems to really pull out more of the detail. So that's something to keep in mind. Let's see, I think we have a couple of questions. All right, that's the blog. Awesome. What does dither mean? Good question. So when you're on the, whoops, not that layer. Let's go back to another gradient maps. Dither is to be used if you start seeing like banding between the colors, if you're not getting a smooth blend from one color to the next and you're kind of getting lines, the dither will help fix that. I haven't really had a problem with that, and I'm not sure what causes that. But that would be what you would use that for. So good question. Thanks, Sherry. Do you flatten the image to save it? I don't ever flatten my images first. I always save everything as a TIFF. especially something like this. So I could come back in here and save this and go, oh, well, maybe I want another version, and come back in here and choose something else. And let's open one of the sky gradients. There's one of my sets. We can make another texture just like that, just by changing the color. So I always save things first as a TIFF, whether it's a texture or a photo, and then save it as a JPEG when I need it. So if I'm going to, say, put it on Facebook, you know, if it's a photo, then I would make it about a 4x6, put my watermark on it, and save it as a JPEG for posting. If I'm going to print it, I would size it and then save it as the JPEG to send out for a print. But I always save my TIFF files, always. So that's a good question. Thank you. Heather, loving it. Thank you. Yes, magical control. What texture? This one is actually, it was an outtake from one of my sets. I'll look up the set though and tell you. There's a bunch that are similar to this. I'll put that in the follow-up notes because I don't remember exactly the name of the set. The ones in the stores, the textures that you get in the stores are TIFFs. So they are sold as, I'm sorry, I take back, as JPEGs. So you can't modify them other than you can apply layers over them if you wanted to do something like this, with a black and white and then a gradient map. But I'm not going to give away my TIFF files because those are my creations. So they are JPEGs. If you create something else from it, then you can always save that version as a TIFF if you do that. Jackie has a great question. Why do you save as a TIFF versus a PSD file? A PSD file is a Photoshop file, is proprietary to Photoshop. So if I decide I want to take that file into Luminar and edit it some more, I cannot take a PSD into any other program but Photoshop. A TIFF file is a universal format. So I can take that into Luminar, I can take it into Topaz, I can take it into, even though I don't use it, onto On1 or Affinity or any other editing program can read a TIFF file, but they won't read a PSD file. So that's why way back when I first started doing all this stuff, I used to save things as a PSD file until I realized the difference, and I haven't saved anything as a PSD other than if it was accidental in years. So I always save as a TIFF. That's a great question. And that is why. If you use other programs, if you only use Photoshop for all of your editing and don't use, Luminar or something like that. And I typically use Luminar as a plugin, so I would still be using it in Photoshop anyway, but if you use other things as standalone programs, then you wouldn't be able to bring in the PSD files. So that is that one. And I had another texture I was going to show you real quick, how you could just really change them up. Because I got through these faster than I thought, but I still have a couple more things to show you. So, a simple texture like this is another one of mine. You can just add the gradient map, and then there's a great black and white version. You could reverse it and make it more of a lighter color, but just go in and pick any texture. Let's do something from, so one of the new sets, Nature's Pastels. Sometimes I find with pastels, depending on your background, if you don't have a lot of contrast, they don't show up as well. So sometimes you have to look around for a the right gradient for the image that you have. And that would happen even with a photo, depending on what you're doing with it. And then sometimes if you have one, you need to undo the reverse and it will show up better. So you need to play around with them as well. If you go into the sky ones, that one looks nice. So it definitely could, create all kinds of things. So like this one, I don't really like the blue on the yellow. That would be one I would probably reverse. And it's all personal taste, like anything that we do in Photoshop. Thank you, Phil. I appreciate the comment. My husband has a question. Yes, dear.
You were to take this this layer, right? And you
Yes.
put a wave over it, a wave filter over it.
Yep.
And you had another, you could put that in, just like edit that one and still merge them.
Yes, I think I know what you mean. He's asking if I had this gradient here and I wanted to add a filter, like to either blur it or you know, add a wave or do, you know, some other kind of Photoshop filter. What I would probably do first is I wouldn't, if I applied it now, that would only apply it to the texture, or I mean, sorry, to the gradient layer. The way you've seen me merge a layer to take things into like Photoshop, because I wanted to affect everything. It's a good question, dear. The keyboard shortcut is Control-Alt-Shift-E. And on a Mac, that'd be Command-Option-Shift-E. So what that's done is merge these two layers without flattening them, if I wanted to keep this and not flatten this file. And then I could go in here and do, let's do a distort thing. Let's do like an ocean ripple. Sometimes they do funky things and they look pretty cool for texture sometimes too. So let's just say, okay. So there's another way you can do this. And what I didn't do that I typically do is I would also duplicate this layer first before I applied the filter, because now it's applied to this, where if I didn't like the filter, it would be easy to just, you know, delete it. Yes, dear. So Pam, the Mac option would be Command, Option, Shift, and the letter E. Can you take an unedited image shot as a JPEG into Luminar? Yes, you can, Deb. You can take most formats, more, you know, camera raw type things. You can do a raw file, you can do a JPEG, you can do a TIFF. And if any of you guys have Luminar AI already, I just got a note today that they're going to be doing another free upgrade to Luminar AI. That'll be the 5th free upgrade since it's been released. They're adding a couple new functions in the sky replacement and a couple other, they've added some new camera profiles and a couple other little, you know, a few bug fixes and that kind of thing. So it's not a major upgrade, but it is something that's included if you already own that. Yes, dear. Somebody had, oh, Mason had a question on today's notes. You should have gotten an email from my system, from Meredith Images, that will have the download link in it. If you didn't, shoot me an email and I'll send you a direct link. Every now and then, I've noticed email is weird some days. Some systems, depending on the email provider, tends to send my stuff to spam or blocks it altogether, especially because there's downloads in it. So if you ever order something from me and don't see it within like 5 or 10 minutes, just shoot me an email and I'll send you direct links, because then what I do is I just put them in Dropbox and give you the direct link and you can download them. So thank you. Okay, so let's see. The command option, it's for the merging a layer, it's on a Mac would be command, I'm sorry, control, now I forgot. I forgot. Let's see, do I have it? I don't have that in here because I didn't have that planned in the notes. Instead of Control Alt, it's Command Option. Yeah. Command Option Shift and the letter E. Or I'll type it in here so you guys have that. Command Option plus Shift plus E. And on a PC, it's Control plus Alt plus Shift plus E. There you go. That's how you merge layers. Alrighty. So let's see. I got one more thing I want to show you. So this, in last Thursday's blog, I did a quick tutorial with this pumpkin image. This is my original, and I did a couple of effects on it first. I did one thing in Nick, so since we have time, and I'm going to show you something else you can do with filters or with the gradients as well when we're done. But I'll show you this one quick, so since we have some time. So I went into Analog Effects Pro, and when I start doing these things, I pick a picture and I'm like, all right, what can I do to this? What can I make it look at, different, fun, stuff like that. So I want to open Analog Effects is where I started. And I ended up staying right here in Classic Camera and using this first preset. Oh, it's got to finish loading here. Damn it. Okay, so this first one is this. I just thought I really liked the warmth that it gave this photo. So I just used the default as it was. And we'll say, okay. Come on. I'm getting a dinging in my ear. And then from here, Nick makes its own layer, so that's why I didn't duplicate it. If you've watched any of my stuff, you know I'm big at keeping things on separate layers. So I'm going to duplicate this layer, and I'm going to go into Smart Photo Editor. And I like to use it as a plugin. And I bought they came out with the plugin version, I think it was last year sometime. And it was an upgrade, and you can buy it either as a complete standalone, I think it's $29 or something like that. And then the full version to use as a plugin is like $49. I do have a code on my website. You can save $10 off of it. It's $10 or 15%. I forgot. And that code changes monthly, but we just changed it, so it's correct at the moment. So I went into the effects gallery, and I have some favorites saved, so I started poking around there. And the one that I thought was kind of cool was some of these black and white line drawings. And the one I went with was, of course, I'm going to just type it in because I can't find it. It was black, white, line drawing. Let's see if it pops up. Of course, it's going to be difficult. Right. There it is. That's the one I wanted. So I'm going to just select that and apply this. And then I decided to add a gradient map. Or actually, just a gradient, not a map. I did a gradient layer. So we're going to do our gradient. And into here. And I use this Fiery Autumn. And we're going to say OK. And I think I had the darker at the bottom. We'll say OK. And then we're going to change this to overlay. So you can also use it to colorize an image like that. I thought it was just such a cool little simple project, but it's another way that you can use a gradient. So I'm going to, yes, I agree, Pat. Smart Photo Editor is a great value for everything. There are literally thousands of presets in there, and most of them are created by the community. So you can even save them and share your own presets that you do with them as well. So other people can use them. So I'm going to show you one. I have a finished project, and this was a little more involved, so I didn't think we'd have time to get through it in the webinar. But in the notes, I actually put a couple of resources that I was looking at with some videos, and there was, there's one, gradients versus gradient maps, kind of like what I was talking about in the beginning from Blake Rudis at the F64 Academy. And there was another one from Phlearn, P-H-L-E-A-R-N, 5 Beautiful Effects with Gradients, How to Create Sun Flares, Light Rays, and Background Coloring. So you can also utilize a gradient to create light rays. So this image, let me go back. That's my original image, and the sky was a little washed out. This was right after it had stopped raining, like major thunderstorm downpour. We were parked in this, this is on the Skyline Drive. We were with some friends a couple years ago. And so I used a gradient. You can see I made a mask and then applied the gradient so it only added a little bit of blue to my sky. And then by utilizing the gradient and the smart filter, and this video goes into all of the steps on how to do this, you can create tone flares. So it's really kind of cool, and you can see I masked them away from some of the trees, but it was a really neat way to do it. So check that out. If you have the notes, it's on towards the end of the notes. And I also put a couple of sources, of course, my link to my gradients, and Design Cuts is another company that I love and work with. And I have a, the notes are for sale in my store, and right now they are just $5 like they always are for the first week. So if you go to my meredithimages.com and click on the Peacock Studio and then go to webinar notes, they are available there. You could use Luminar for the sun flare. It was just, I had seen this technique and wanted to try it, so I thought it was a pretty cool way to do it. I have done sun flares in various ways, and I typically would use Luminar, so good question, Phil. But it's just another tool in the toolbox. Sometimes some things work better than at others, so it's another way to look at it and to use the gradients. So let's see if we have any other questions. I can't believe we actually got through everything. Usually I'm scrambling to try and get them in, and we actually have a few minutes left. Yeah, I liked it too, Sandy. I thought it was pretty natural looking. Any other questions before we wrap up? Alrighty, and with the notes as well, you will get the not only the gradients I use today, which are all of these up here, but I created a set of free gradients that I'm giving with the notes. They're called citrus gradients, so they're really bright, be great for adding some warmth and some color to images, so you get a whole set of 12 gradients for free along with the notes. So those alone are worth more than the price of the notes. Was Anthropomorphics a plugin? That's the Smart Photo Editor. That's the company that does that. So under Filter Anthropics. So yes, you can use it as a plugin if you buy that version. Like I said, I think it's $49. And then you can, if you use the link on my website, there's a page with all of my affiliate links. You can save some money on that as well. TIFF versus PSD, is one a bigger file than the other? It's a good question. I never really pay attention, to be honest. I would think they're fairly similar, but I could be wrong. I have a really big drive. If we have a shared network drive between Dave and I, and it's got four 4-terabyte drives in it, so I don't usually worry about space too much. Okay, somebody said TIFFs are larger, so thank you. But again, it works better for my purposes. The other thing that I like is, like, I'm going to drag over my other screen. When I have like things set up for a webinar or whatever, or even my images, when I save a TIFF file, I can see it here. If this were a PSD, you would just get the little PSD logo, and you wouldn't get to see it. So, that's what I wanted to show you, how to load the gradients. Thanks, Mary. So when you're in the gradient area, it's very similar to loading brushes. When you're in this panel, you're going to click on that little gear wheel and just say import gradients. And then you're going to go to, this is the citrus ones that are with the notes. You would see it just like this if you go to that notes file once you've downloaded it, and just double click it, and it will add it to the bottom of your panel. And there they are. And then once you've added something here, you can drag these into different orders. If you get just the single blue line, that's going to put it between those two other files. If you get that blue outline, that means it's going to put that folder inside of the other folder. So if you just want to reorder it, make sure you just get that one blue line, and then it would put it in between the other ones there. Delete groups. I'm going to get rid of that. So that's there. Let's see what else we got. Thanks, Steve. Glad you were watching.
Can you use it in camera club competition?
I'm sorry, say that again, dear.
Can you use this process in camera club competition?
Can you use this process in camera club competitions? With gradients, I would say yes, because they also come as part of Photoshop. You get all these, I've kind of reordered mine, but you would have a whole set of basic stuff here that come in Photoshop. So it's still your image and you're blending it. It's always best if you're in a very strict kind of club, or if you're sending it to PSA or, you know, a regional camera club council, just to be sure of their rules and double check with somebody, you know, who has an authority who can give you a definitive answer. I would say yes, though, to gradients as opposed to textures, where those tend to be looked at as, you know, somebody else's quote artwork in certain competitions. So some of those, you know, it just depends. The terms of use, Shelley, are included with every product. I don't have it on the website per se, but there's a copy, there's a PDF document in every set of textures and gradients and stuff. Somebody said, I may have missed this, but where's the gradient editor in Photoshop? So we've been working, rather than using the gradient tool, we're using gradient adjustment layer. So you'd come down to the bottom right and hit the black and white circle, your adjustment layers, and then select a gradient. And then clicking on this bar opens up the gradient editor. And that's where you would find everything that you've installed. Yeah, I would think, Robert, too, that you should be able to use it in projected images, definitely in like creative categories. I would probably not use them on something I'm putting in nature, because then you're changing the essence of the image and that would not be allowed. So nature categories tend to be very restrictive as to what you can do, other than, you know, basic, you know, color correction. You can't clone things out. You can't have hand of man, other than in very specific circumstances, you know, that kind of stuff. So just check with, you know, the competition director to get the definitive answer. So I think we've gone through the questions. Thank you, guys. I'm glad you enjoyed it. And I think that should cover it. And we're right just about at 5 o'clock, 1 minute to go. So thank you, everyone. If you think of anything else, always feel free to email me, or, you know, contact me, message me through Facebook, whatever. And I'm happy to answer your questions. And I will, you know, put a few of these in Thursday's blog as well, with the link to the recording. And you'll get the link as well emailed to you tomorrow. And again, if you purchase anything and didn't get the link for the download, just shoot me an email and I will get you taken care of. Thanks so much. I appreciate everybody's support. I've got lots of good things coming down the line. I'm thinking about some different things that I want to do. So stay tuned to the blog for all the details. And if you have anything else specific you'd like to see me do in a webinar, shoot me an email or message me or text me or whatever, and give me your ideas, because I'm always looking for good ideas. We will, Phil asked, any info about Luminar Neo? I haven't gotten my trial version yet. I should be getting the beta, they told us probably around mid-October. So once I get that, I will definitely be sharing some more info. Otherwise, I've got a pretty lengthy article in the blog that I've been repeating with the current info they've given us to release. some things they tell us, and then we have to keep it under wraps for a little while because they're still developing and refining the product. But I can't wait to get my hands on it. I think it's going to be very cool. Alrighty, thanks everybody. Have a great evening or afternoon, depending where you're at. I know we got some people who are early morning right now, so enjoy your day. And I will talk to you all soon. Thanks. Have a good night.